I just remember what it was like to be young, and so much of what I felt when I was young was that the world was proceeding without any input from me, without any inquiry towards me, and just the sense that the world was unfair and not paying very much attention to me was very deep in my brain. And so I think the story of the orphans kind of traveling in a world that leaves them more and more on their own and is more and more strange and incomprehensible to them. I think that came from just a notion that I was in a world that I did not understand and that was happening beyond my control. So my childhood was a lot less dramatic than that of the Baudelaire's for sure. And I grew up in very comfortable circumstances, but I was aware and made aware of how much there was going on outside my own circumstances, and that made it seem even stranger. And then also because I gravitated toward books so strongly, the idea that reading could produce a world that was more comprehensible and more pleasurable than the world that was around me. It was a very strong idea to me. My parents were both big readers, and so reading, after dinner or some lazy weekend afternoon or something was something that happened very frequently. I took to it past all expectation from my parents, certainly, but the idea that that was the central cultural event of your life was passed on to me very young. I know people who were raised in families where someone was always playing an instrument or people were always singing around the fireplace or something like that. And my parents liked music too, but it was reading that was what we did every night. It was, when my parents would take me someplace that was maybe not especially for children, obviously you brought a book. Obviously when you packed for a vacation or you packed for a train ride or anything like that, there was always a book. So I think that was how it became so central, is that it was just around in my household. And we realized when my son was very young, he was so young, and he fell right about 2 feet from where I am now, and he fell down and he was crying, and before he went to us, we said, oh, come over here. And he went to the bookshelf first, and he brought this book because we had so many times read to him in comfort that he knew that was the first thing that would happen, would be a book. So even though he was crying and he didn't come right to us, he came first to the bookshelves, which was when we knew we had raised him in a similarly hysteric literary household. There's more distraction in a household, I think, than there was in my childhood. And so I think, nearly everyone has a screen that can bring them the complete history of film and television, really. And so to have reading be your primary form of entertainment and your primary form of relaxation, I think is more of an uphill battle and more of a conscious choice than it was. In my room growing up, there were no screens. It wasn't very unusual then. But I think that meant that to entertain myself, I picked up all these books from the shelf that my parents had put there. And we raise our child the same way. He's in high school now, and he has a computer that he does his homework on, and he has a phone to get around the city and talk to his friends, but all that stays in the kind of shared area of the house. And in his room he has only books and music to entertain him. So I think that we try to encourage that conscious choice here, but there are more tempting things than there were when I was growing up, I think. Well, and it seems that so much of reading on the screen the way that it's presented to you when you're just kind of online is that you don't necessarily read everything that you're given. You see that countlessly, that people will read the headline or a few sentences of some article and feel that they've gotten the gist of it. And I think that that's less of a feeling when you have a book in front of you. If you only hit page 10 of the book, you know that you haven't read most of it. You know that you don't have the idea of it. And that seems to me crucial in a world where so many people's primary reading of the news of the day or anything else will be on a screen in front of them, to kind of keep developing that habit of consciously reading all of it, which is often not done. The Lemony Snicket books, in All the Wrong Questions and in A Series of Unfortunate Events, are narrated by this man who is certainly not me. And so I thought it would be interesting to tell the story from the point of view of some mysterious character whose connection to the events is not always clear. And I thought it would be fun to publish the books under the name of that narrator rather than the name of the author. So it's never quite felt like a pseudonym to me. It's more felt just like a character who comes and presents these stories, and that's interesting to me. And so when I travel and go talk about the Snicket books to young people, I always say, Lemony Snicket was going to come here, but he can't. He couldn't show up after all, which has always felt true to me, because he can't show up. He's a mysterious man existing in a world that we can't access except by reading about it. And I just thought that would be an interesting way to think about literature and think about where stories come from. Well, I think the inspiration was just the intense emotions of being a very young child. If you have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, they're going to be crying, a dozen times a day. It would not be unusual. They're going to be afraid of so many different things that seem harmless to adults. They're going to be, jealous and craving human contact and wanting to be alone, and kind of really a wide spectrum of emotions that, if they happen that quickly to an adult, that would be really disturbing. If you knew someone who was crying 12 times a day, they would be grieving or otherwise brokenhearted, and that's totally normal for a child. So I think that any good picture book for very young children is tackling those kind of emotions in one way or another. I think they're very familiar to a child, who will be furious one moment and then relax the next, or who will be, seemingly inconsolable, crying and then giggling 5 minutes later. So I think that kind of very dramatic and jarring way that emotions pile up when you're that young match the good picture books. So that was what I tried to do. I just thought of, I would see children around me and I would think of how that is. I mean, the fear of the dark is certainly nearly universal. It's hard to think of a child who doesn't get nervous if you show them a dark doorway that you're going to walk into, or a closet or something like that. And in the way that we all remain afraid of it to some extent, the way we all are going to pause as something happens, the way if it suddenly grew dark in this room now, it would be very disconcerting. So I think that those emotions end up driving the stories for little people, because they're not necessarily interested in bits of history or mythology or but these huge kind of emotional questions, as they just begin to acclimate to the world, I think resonate with them all the time. When you're an adult and something upsetting happens to you, you have to tell that story, right? We see very dramatic examples where people have to testify or something about how important that kind of healing process is. But even just the ordinary stories of someone annoys you or upsets you, the number of times that you need to tell that story to kind of get acclimated to it. And I think when you're young and you don't have the vocabulary to tell that story, you often have to read this kind of allegory over and over again. So I think it helps them name everything and get acclimated to everything. And I mean, I like writing picture books because I think in many ways it's every author's dream that you're going to have some reader who will read your book 30 or 40 times. Whatever your favorite book is when you're an adult, you'll never read it as much as what your favorite book was when you were that young. A picture book they'll say again, and you just flip. I mean, for me, that book is about exploring the world, and that there's something fascinating kind of wherever you look. And that was really inspired by the illustrator, Myra Kalman. We've worked together a lot, but that was our first book together. But if you take a walk with her, she's noticing all these tiny things. She's such a strongly visual person. And I wanted the book to convey that sense of wonder and exploration. You know, oh, look what's happening now. Let's look over here at this thing. Let's look at this word over here. And the way that some words are very specific and tied to the object or to the person, and some words are more abstract. And so, you know, you need to learn the word bird and you need to learn the word despondent. Those are both important terms, getting right in your head. And so I think that book, I think that emotion would be kind of exploratory or just inquisitive about everything that's happening. I had a very strong musical education, and I use music to inspire my books, and much of the music that I participate in or listen to is also inspired from literature. So I like the way that's a permeable membrane. I took piano lessons, and I think that they encouraged me to practice as something to keep doing and be good at. But I think more they were just enthusiasts for it. And so, you know, a very typical evening would be that they would put some music on and then we would all sit around and read. And so they just were really interested in that. And that's what we do in this household. That's what we do in this room. They were worried.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, they were encouraging. I mean, their love of the arts was such that they found that to be a worthwhile thing to do. But I think that they were worried, as anyone is, who has a child who wants to be an artist, that it's not the easiest way to make a comfortable living, and you're going to have that worry about them. I mean, they left me alone a lot. If I wanted to go to my room for a couple of hours and do nothing, they were perfectly supportive of that. So yeah, they left me alone a lot. He is a big reader and a big writer and a big music listener. I mean, I don't know if he'll end up being an artist. I think, in some ways has a less romantic view of being an artist than I had, because he just sees it. He'll see me working on a book. He'll see my wife working on illustrations. So many friends of ours are working on kind of one project or another. And so he doesn't have a kind of idealized romantic notion of being an artist that I think you might have if you didn't have any access to it. That certainly I had. So I don't know if that will lead him to make that choice, but that's what he's interested in. And he also really likes to spend time alone. So we're a household where we may all be retreating in our separate corners from time to time. Honestly, I think every age has its challenges, and I often think that the teenage age is kind of overstated in terms of its own difficulties. And certainly some teenagers are more challenging than others, and sometimes more challenging than others. But I mean, my son has many of the hallmarks of being a teenager, but I don't think I find them more challenging than, you know, teaching him how to use the bathroom or how to draw the alphabet or all these other things that were part of his earlier childhood. So I think he feels that the family is a kind of team that can get through things. I think that's important. You know, I think that part of being a parent is to try to set that idea up, not necessarily that you can make it better or that you know what to do, but that all of you as a team can get through something. I think that's important. I have always tried for my son to carve out enough time for him in his day so that there's time to just do nothing and to let his thoughts wander or let himself wander. He'll walk around or something. I think that that's really important, because I think that it's that kind of contemplative time that is so essential to being any kind of adult. And I think certainly when you're trying to think about what kind of adult you want to be, you need that kind of time. And I think if your whole day is very highly interactive with school or with a screen in front of you, or with, you know, messages or endless tasks and endless interaction, I think you don't have time to think about what it is that is important to you. So if you can make that time available, that's what I try to do. I mean, I think I learned how to be a writer by being alone in my room a lot. And now I'm alone in my room a lot, all day long, working. So I think, but even when you end up a doctor or a professor or an engineer or anything, that you probably figured it out when you were alone. You probably figured out when you were thinking about something that that's what you wanted to do. Everyone wants the best for their children, and so if you have some vision of what would be the best for them, it's very hard not to push that on them. You know, I think in my case, what happened with the Snicket books is so extraordinary and unique that it hasn't turned into some dream of mine that everyone can do it or that my son should do it. From contemplation, I take a lot of walks. I swim most mornings in the water, so I'm thinking, and I like to take the bus or the train instead of driving, so that I can really just kind of let my thoughts wander around. And I think that's so essential. So I read things that I think are going to be interesting and take notes on them. I look at things that I think might inspire me. I just kind of bumble around looking for whatever that might be, and I write it down. We have pens and pencils and writing surfaces everywhere in this house. I'm sure we have it in the drawer right here. And so my wife is an illustrator and a writer, and so she is always sketching something or other. And my son, his bedroom is downstairs, but the dining room is usually set up for him to do his homework, and there's a million scraps of paper where he's written something down that is interesting to him. And that's just how it goes. It's hard to be rejected in any circumstances. But I mean, I had people around me who believed in me. I had a very strong mentor. My wife, she wasn't my wife yet, but the woman who became my wife was always very supportive of me. Yeah, but I mean, everyone knows you can't be crushed by defeat, but then when you want to be crushed by defeat anyway, then you have to find people who can help you. I think it's more the matter. The only way to not take failure very seriously is to get used to it. So, but I mean, you know, childhood is so built in with failure. You know, you have to learn to tie your shoes, you have to learn to spell words, you have to learn to do all these things. And I think that hopefully prepares you. I think that the ability to look critically at the world, to say, why is this the way it is, and why can't it be different, is essential. It's essential in art, it's essential in science, it's essential in everything. And I think you have to start building that very early and encouraging people to ask questions about all kinds of things and the kind of question that they ask. And I think so often when you're talking with a child just about something they've noticed in the world, they've noticed some pattern or some angle or some detail that never would have occurred to you. And so I think you want to make sure you have that space for them to ask those questions. Because it becomes harder and harder. You become self-conscious, and the older you get, the more you feel you should know something. And you know, I think that's a very adult feeling when you feel that you can't ask because you should know already. And I think that's what causes a lot of static hegemony in the world, is that we don't ask the questions always that are on our minds. I mean, reading and writing are really the big skills. You have to just read a lot over and over, and you have to keep writing things down. To be any kind of writer, I think you have to write many, many bad things first. And you might as well get started writing bad things right away. So I think you have to do that. And then there's so many different ways to be a writer. When you're interested in making good sentences, when you're interested in using the written word to communicate, there's so many different ways that you can go into it. And it's what I tell a lot of parents I meet too, whose children want to be writers, because I think what you think is, oh, it's so hard to be an author. You know, it's how are you ever going to do it as a poet? How are you? And that there's so many ways to participate in reading and writing that are really valuable and really interesting. And I try to remind people that it's not always about making some work of literature. It's often about just participating in this tradition and this culture. Yeah, I think it's so essential to learn how to do that, and I think writing it down is very powerful as opposed to just talking like I'm doing now. So my sentences are all higgledy-piggledy, and maybe some of it's clear and some of it isn't. But when you write it down and you look at it and you think, is this the sentence that needs to be the sentence? How do I make it better? And I just think that's so essential. Yesterday I was working with some musicians on this music and theater project that we're doing, and so we were all changing some lyrics of these various songs, but it felt like we were writing an article. You know, it felt like we were trying to communicate these ideas as clearly as possible, even when they're very imaginative ideas. And so I think that's at the heart of any kind of literature and any kind of writing. There's usually some number of official drafts. I would say for a book, it's usually between 4 and 5 drafts. But that doesn't even count just the number of times you go over it, the number of times you're making these tiny changes. And you just do it and do it and do it. And I find it very inspiring and fascinating, even when it's frustrating. You know, it's just become kind of part of a practice that I do of making a sentence better. That's interesting to me. I mean, I've worked with good editors, and so they can help me figure out when it's enough, or sometimes I just get the feeling that I know it's not perfect, but it's the best I'm going to be able to do at this particular thing. Yeah, I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm sure there are books that I could go and rewrite endlessly for the rest of my life, but at a certain point you think, okay, this is how it's going to be. It's such an interesting space, reading. It's just something that I think of all the time, because you kind of want to make things clear, but then you kind of want to leave room for the imagination to play. And so, yeah, you just try to strike that balance. I think an important part of writing is missing information. Now, for this kind of writing anyway, for fictional writing, is the idea that something's missing that you need to fill it in. You know, the Baudelaire orphans are hardly described. And so they've been published all over the world. There's different illustrations and different editions, and people send me drawings that they have made of who they think the characters are, and part of that was by design, so that young readers could imagine themselves in that world, that they wouldn't come across a physical detail that said, no, this isn't you. And you can't write entirely without description, but I did try to be kind of as vague as possible, and so often where they go is described because it's full of things that I've made up and you want to think about that, but they remain these kind of blank slates. So then when you're reading, you can imagine yourself there. I think my rule of thumb when raising my own child was to try to be as honest as possible about all that I don't know, which is a lot. And I think that we all know intellectually that there are many roads to happiness and to success, and that even the definitions of happiness and success are not something that we agree upon. But I try to convey to my son all the time that there's so much I don't know, and that he and I can help each other, perhaps, and I can give him some advice from whatever meager experience I have. But I think it's very important to not set yourself up as an unimpeachable authority, because you aren't. And from the when my child was so young and he would ask about something that I didn't know, I would say, well, that's a mystery, let's find that out, instead of quickly kind of making something up. And when he talks to me about his life and the decisions he's facing, I try to give support without telling him that I know the answer, because I don't. So I think it's so important to be honest about what you don't know. I say to my son all the time, I've never raised a son before. You're the only son I've ever raised. And if I raised a son before, you'd be a different son. So what are we gonna do in this situation? And I think that makes him feel confident, because he realizes that nobody really knows what they're doing and everyone's trying, which is, I think, a much more comfortable place to be in than to think there's people who know what to do and I don't know what to do. That's what I think.